change your world. It's time to let it go. The things you used to think, the things you used to know, they don't help you anymore. It's time to change your mind. If it's peace you want to find.
This is Kurt Kaikonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Change Your World, we'll be in the book of Exodus. So grab your Bible and let's get started.
It's time to change your world. You need to let it go. Oh, oh.
And now the third feast that these men were to attend, that was the Feast of Ingathering, which is also known as the Feast of Trumpets or the Feast of Booths. And that's in the fall. We just kind of had that. That's in late September or October. And many people think that this third feast, this Feast of Ingathering, it will also have a New Testament fulfillment. And a lot of people think that this will be the day that Christ returns at the rapture. They don't tell you which year it's going to happen, and it could be, but it also might not be. We don't know yet, so we don't really set ourselves on dates and years, but it's just interesting to think that God might do that. And so on these feasts, you're not to come empty-handed. So you're to bring your offering, and it says you're not supposed to offer your sacrifices with leaven, and we know that's because leaven represents sin. And then it also says that you're not to leave any of your sacrifice until morning, where it sits out all night and where the flies get on it, because this is holy. You have to remember, this sacrifice represents Jesus, whose body wasn't left to decay. And so this is just like the Passover lamb. It couldn't be left overnight, where they had to burn it up, because this isn't just common food, this is holy. And then at the end of this, there's this really strange command where it talks about all these feasts, and then it says, you shall not boil a young goat in its mother's milk. And this sounds so out of place here. Why would God mention that here? And the reason that he mentions it here is because at this Feast of Ingathering, which is around the time of the harvest, this is at September, October, well, the Canaanites, the land where Israel is going to be going, they harvest the same time. And the Canaanites, they had this pagan fertility ritual, and they did it this time of year. And for them, it was like a magic spell. And they would take this young goat, and they'd make this offering of this kid, not your kid, but the kid of the goat, to their pagan gods. And they would cut up this young goat, and they would boil it in the milk of its mother. And then they would take that milk and they would sprinkle it all over their trees and their fields and their gardens, as like it was this magic potion or spell to make their fields more fertile and fruitful. And so what God is really telling them to do here is to not imitate their practices. But the Jews, they didn't take this command as strictly being a prohibition against imitating pagan fertility rites, but instead, they made it into a dietary law, which it was never intended to be. What they did, they had taken this passage and they had taken it so far out of context, and they began to interpret it in these really extreme ways, and then they began to create their own laws. And their misinterpretations that they made of this law became their kosher laws. So now you can't have a milk product on your goat burger. And it doesn't matter if that cheese came from a cow, where you can't have milk from milk or any milk product with any meat. You can't eat them at the same meal, though you are allowed to have milk products with your fish. But you're not allowed to have milk products or cheese with your chicken. And you kind of wonder, well, because chickens, they don't produce milk, but you can't have a McChicken with cheese. You can't have a McDonald's anything with cheese. And in Israel, if you go to McDonald's and you get an ice cream at Mickey D's, there's no dairy in their ice cream. It's fake ice cream. And what they're saying here and how they've interpreted this, that is when you're eating meat and then you drink some milk, or you eat, like a dairy product, while it's in your stomach, the milk is boiling in the acids of your stomach. And so now you're boiling the meat you eat in the milk in your stomach. And so they're never allowed to eat meat and dairy at the same meal. And now, because of this law, it's gone so far that they won't even use the same pots and pans for cooking meat or dairy products. Or you're not even allowed to use the same plates. So you have your milk plates and you have your meat plates. In fact, they have their own refrigerators. So you have a refrigerator for your meats and you have a refrigerator for your milks. So they've taken it way far out of its original context. But all this law was to do, and all it was intended for, was to make a humane distance between a mother and the death of her offspring. And where that's against nature, you're making a mother to be an accomplice in the death of her child. All right. So now we get to verse 20, and now we read about this angel who's to go before Israel to bring them into the promised land. And it says that they're not to provoke him, that they're to obey him. And what's interesting here is that it says, he will not pardon your transgressions. Well, the only one that can pardon transgressions is God. God is the only one who can forgive sins. And then God says, for my name is in him. All right, so we know a couple angels whose names have the name of God in them. We have Michael, and we have Gabriel, and El means God. But with this angel, it isn't saying that the name of God is in his name, but that God's name is in him. So what this is saying, it's saying that this angel is God. And so this is Jesus. This is Jesus as the pre-incarnate Christ. And all pre-incarnate means is before becoming flesh, because carne means flesh. So it's like your carne asada burrito. It means a burrito with meat, so meat being flesh. And then it says here in verse 22, but if you indeed obey his voice, and then it says, do all I speak. So this is now God speaking. So it starts with his voice, the angel's voice, but then it ends with God saying, I speak. So right here, God is saying, he's going to go with them. He's going to go with them into the land as the angel of the Lord. And who the angel of the Lord is Jesus in the Old Testament. And then it says, he's going to cut off all their enemies, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Pezerites, the Canaanites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. And now if you take a second and you think about this and you think, okay, now who led Israel through all these battles? And if you think about it, you go, well, that was Joshua. It wasn't Moses, because it was Joshua who did all the taking and the settling of the land. And it all happens in the book of Joshua. And then when you get to the book of Joshua, if you've ever read that, you might remember that in Joshua chapter 5 and verse 13, that he ran into this angel outside of Jericho before they were going to take it. And then Joshua, he saw him and his sword was drawn, where Joshua asked him, are you for us or for our adversaries? And then the angel said, no. And he's meaning that he's not for them or he's against them, but as commander of the army of the Lord. And the word Lord there is spelled in all capital letters. So that's the name for Yahweh. And then it says, Joshua, he fell on his face and he worshiped him. And then Joshua was told to take off his sandals, because he was told that where he was standing was holy ground. So that's the exact same thing that Moses was told at the burning bush. So where this angel is God, so that means that this angel is Jesus. And then it makes these promises that if they will do whatever the angel says, and to destroy all the idols in the land and to refrain from worshiping them, that he has this promise to bless them with bread and with water and health, with no sickness or miscarriages, and that you're going to have a lot of children and you're going to live to an old age happily, and that God, he will send his fear before them, And that's exactly what he did. And that's the report we heard from Rahab the harlot, that when the spies came to him, that he says that all her people lived in the fear of God of Israel since they came out of Egypt. And then God says he's going to do battle for them with hornets. So God is going to battle for them in supernatural ways. And we should be able to believe that because we just saw God do that in Egypt. So we should be able to think he can do it here. And there is actually a record that shows that he really did that. And that's how it happened. Because there's this little tiny blurb in Joshua 24:12, which is the last chapter of Joshua, where it says, the Amorites were driven out by hornets, and they did not have to use their swords or bows. But some people, they don't think the Lord used hornets, because the word hornets is very similar to the word for Egypt, where some say it's just a reference to the Egyptian armies who frequently invaded the land of Canaan. But we do know that when they do get to Canaan, it will only take Israel 7 years to conquer the land. But they will never, ever fully conquer all the territory that God had given them. And the closest they ever got was during the reign of King David and Solomon. And that's because that this land that God had given Israel was big. And it tells us all the boundaries that he had originally had given them. And it says, from the Red Sea to the sea. And when it says the sea, it's talking about the Mediterranean Sea. And then it says Philistia, which is on the coast, from the desert to the river. And when it talks about the river, it's talking about the Euphrates River. And the Euphrates River, it starts all the way over there in Turkey, and it flows all the way down to the Persian Gulf. And now there's something that I think the Lord uses in this area that he does in our lives too. I believe that the Lord, that he gives us a lot of territory to conquer. He has all these things that he's planned to do in our lives, and he's given them to us, but we never claim them. We may claim some, and we may even claim a lot, but I believe he's given us a lot more than we could ever imagine. And then God tells them the reasons why he doesn't give them everything at once. And I believe it's the same way in our lives, where God doesn't give us everything we ask for at once, at one time. And that's because I think he waits for us to grow. He waits till we're mature enough so that we can receive it. And it's just like Israel here. He's waiting till Israel grows because they're too small. They're too small to claim everything that God has for them. So they're going to have to wait till they increase. Because if they received it now, all the beasts in the field, they would start to destroy them. And I'm not really sure. I just might be making things up. But sometimes I think maybe our beast could be things like our pride, that he doesn't give us everything, or sometimes how he doesn't give us all riches, because you can see how riches can ruin a person by having too much too soon with not enough wisdom. And then God tells them not to make any covenants with the inhabitants of the land, that there'll be a snare to them. And that's the same with us when we make alliances with people in the world that have worldly ways, and where we might not say, like they do, that they serve other gods, but you kind of know that they don't serve our God, because their relationship with God looks nothing like ours. That their relationships aren't always based on the Bible. And when we make these alliances with the world, it's a snare to us. And you lost some of your territory because of those compromises. And that kind of stuff you may never get back. So you may not ever get back everything that God had planned for you. Those things could be gone now. And if that's true, there's really nothing you can do about what's happened, because that's the past. And so maybe it was like with a bad business partner, or maybe you had a marriage that didn't make it because your spouse served a different God than you, or maybe you made some kind of alliance that you shouldn't have made. But there's still a lot of territory for you to claim if you follow this same angel, this same Jesus, and you do what he told them to do. If you will hear him and you will obey him, it says here, he will fight your enemies too. And he'll bring you into the place that God has prepared for you. And we'll see as we go through the Bible, Israel, they made covenants with the people of the land that they weren't supposed to, and it really did hurt them. All right. So up to now, since Exodus 20:22, to here where we are in chapter 23:33, this is all a private conversation between God and Moses alone on the mountain. And so now we get to chapter 24, and now God's calling Moses, and now he's to bring his brother Aaron and his two nephews, Aaron's two sons, his two oldest boys, Nadab and Abihu. And then he's also supposed to bring along these 70 elders. But they're only allowed to go so far, where still only Moses could come near the Lord. And then Moses here, he tells all the people everything the Lord had just told him. He tells them all about these judgments. And without any hesitation, they all agreed at once. And it says, just like they were one person, they agree, though they will never keep all these laws. But by them agreeing, it was very good to God that they agreed to become his people. And so now Moses, he starts writing all these words down, and he creates this book, and it's called the Book of the Covenant. And it's the same stuff that we're reading in this book now. And you have to see here that not each individual person here, they all have their own individual covenant. It's all the same one, and it's a written covenant, and it's all written in this book. That's the same for us. All of the conditions for our covenant with God, they're all written down in one book. None of us has our own special covenant with God. It's not like there's more conditions for some people and less for other people, where you have your own special rules for your own covenant with God. Okay, so now on the very next morning, Moses, he gets up really early and he gets really busy, and he brings his book and he builds an altar, and he makes 12 pillars with the rocks to represent the 12 tribes. And this covenant, it's going to be an agreement that's to be bound in blood. So this is like becoming blood brothers. And Moses, he appoints young men to bind the oxen and to make these sacrifices. And he picks young men because this is going to be hard work, and it's going to take strong young men to be able to tie those oxen to the altar. And then the blood is collected. And then he sprinkles half of it on the altar. Then Moses, he reads the whole book that he wrote to the people. And they say the same things that they had just told him the day before. They say it again, and they confirm their commitment, saying, all that the Lord has said, we will do. We will be obedient. And then in my mind, it's kind of shocking what happens next. Because now Moses, he starts splattering all this blood on all the people. And so it's getting on all their faces and all their clothes. And then you see everybody around you with all this blood dripping off you. But this is very serious. And so it's not a covenant made in water or oil. This is all warm blood. And then they're told, this is the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you according to these words. Okay, so then I hear this, and now my mind, it runs way, way forward, and it runs to Jesus, to the Last Supper in that upper room where he takes that third cup at the Passover meal. And he says almost the same exact words. This cup, which is poured out for you, is the new covenant in my blood. Where Jesus uses that cup of wine to tell them what's going to be happening to him the next day when he's bound, and which was a far bloodier scene than what we see back here with Moses on this mountain. And where Jesus' blood was sprinkled for our covenant. And then here with Moses, he has half of the blood sprinkled on the altar, and then half of the blood is sprinkled on the people. And what that shows is that both of these parties here, that God and the people, they are mutually bound in this covenant. And with Jesus' blood, it's the same for us. God, he has bound himself to us when we receive Jesus' blood for us. Because the Father, he himself, he also received the same blood of Jesus on his altars. And that's the sacrifice, and that's the blood of our covenant. All right, so now after this covenant is made, the same people that God had called up to the mountain, which was Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and the 70 elders, they all have peace with God. And they're having fellowship with God, where they're able to eat with him, and where it says they saw God. And it's unclear exactly what they saw. And some people think, well, they saw the bottom of his feet, and some people think that, they saw Jesus. But it says that they saw God. And it does say that they saw the pavement that was under his feet, and it was bluer and clearer than our sky. But this wasn't the same experience for when Moses said he saw God. It wasn't like the same face-to-face experience that Moses had. And then it says, on the nobles of the children of Israel, he did not lay his hand. And what that means is he didn't kill them, because these nobles, they saw God and they didn't die. Instead of dying, they had fellowship with God. And this is because all their sins were forgiven by the sprinkling of the blood. And the word noble here, it actually just means corner peg. All right, so now after lunch, the Lord calls Moses and tells him to come up to him. And he says that he has these copies written for him, these 10 commandments for him, that he wrote it all down for him, and he's to come up and get it so that he can teach the people. And so now he takes his assistant Joshua, and you always find that often it's the assistant who becomes the next leader, because Joshua here, he's in training. And so I think, and I don't think it's very important, but I kind of wonder, I wonder if Joshua is one of the 70 elders, because I don't read where he had to go back down off the mountain to go take him up with him. And then Moses tells the rest of the elders just to wait where they are, and he says, wait here for us. And then Moses puts Aaron and Hur in charge. And so Aaron and Hur, those are the same guys that lifted up his arms in that battle against Amalek. And we're going to see later that they didn't really do a good job being left in charge. And then Moses and Joshua, they ascend to the mountain. But it says that the Shekinah glory, the cloud of God, that it rested on the mountain for 6 days. So they were just up there for 6 days, couldn't go any further and just waiting. And then God called Moses up there alone. And it says that when he called Moses up, he said it was like a consuming fire on the top of the mountain. And so it always kind of makes me think of those mountain fires that you see in California when it's on fire. And so I picture Moses walking off into the cloud and then walking into the fire. But I don't know what it was like, but I do think that Moses was very brave. And then we're told that he's going to be up there for 40 days and for 40 nights, and he won't have any food or water. And what's going to be happening up there, besides him just picking up a copy of the 10 Commandments, is that God is going to show Moses what heaven looks like. He's going to show him how the heavenly tabernacle looks. And Moses, he's supposed to take all these patterns, because Moses now, he's going to come back and he's to reproduce it. The way that heaven is laid out, the real sanctuary, because that's what heaven is. Heaven has the real sanctuary, and he's supposed to come and make a reproduction. And what he makes, it will just be a shadow of what's real.
You need to change your world. You need to let it go. Oh.
Thanks for listening to Change Your World. Change Your World is an outreach of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, and your neighborhood church. If you're listening to Change Your World in the Detroit metro area, why don't you join us for church this Sunday? Our service time is 10 a.m. at Calvary Chapel, Waterford, 183 South Winding Drive, Waterford, Michigan. We're competing with the Catholics. It's only an hour. All the donuts you can eat, and you don't have to believe a thing we say, but it could change your world.
You need to change.